Good morning, everyone. My name is Lindsay Harvey. I'm Strategic Director for Classic Lifts, part of the Andwis Group, and I'll be your host for the meeting this morning. Thank you for joining us on our first webinar for 2023. And Classic Lifts is committed to sharing knowledge and supporting our customers across both lift modernisation servicing across a national network from our 7 different regional offices. And it's great to see that we have client representatives joining us today from each part of the country. This morning, we'll be discussing the Fire Safety United Kingdom Regulations of 2022 and its impact upon lifts. This act came into force in January this year, and our aim is to make as many possible aware of its implications. This talk is aimed at lift owners and people managing this type of building asset. We have 2 highly experienced speakers who have a wealth of knowledge to share with you. Each will give a short presentation, and then we will answer any questions you may have. Firstly, to set the scene in terms of this topic, we have Ewing David Cooper, who is a visiting professor at Northampton University and holds both a degree and 2 master's degrees. But in addition, Dave brings over 40 years of practical experience in the industry, being a highly experienced and respected engineer in the building services sector and a fellow and board member of the Chartered Institute of Building Services Engineers. Dave is also a regular speaker at the Lift and Escalator Educational Trust Symposium and runs his own vertical transportation consultancy. Our second speaker is Andrew Harrison, Technical Director for Classic Lifts. Andrew is again a seasoned professional in the lift industry with over 40 years experience and knowledge. Starting as a technician apprentice in 1983, Andrew has worked in different lift companies, both OEMs and independent companies, before joining Classic Lifts in 2010. As one of the founding shareholders, Andrew has been instrumental in growing the business to what it is today. In his presentation, Andrew will provide more detail on the impact of the Act and describe what actions lift owners and lift managers should take. As you listen to the presentations, you may ask questions via the chat function, and we will collect these and provide you with an answer. We've reserved plenty of time for this, but should we run out of time today, we will collect all questions and provide answers to these after the meeting. It's now with great pleasure I ask Dave Cooper to start the topic. Over to you, Dave.
Good morning, everyone. Next slide, please. So what I want you to take away from me this morning is what type of lifts there are, because there is general confusion when we speak to people about the differences between a fireman's lift and a firefighting lift. I picked this cartoon up here. You can see above the door it says fireman's lift, which is a very different animal to the types of lifts that Andrew will be talking about as well after me. Next slide, please. So a little bit of history. So in around 1930, it was recognised that firefighters should be provided with a means of swift access to the upper floors of large buildings beyond the height of their ladders. This resulted in passenger lifts being fitted with a break glass key switch, which firefighters could operate to bring the lift to that floor quickly. The minimum requirements for such lifts were a load capacity of at least 1,200 pounds or 550 kg, which has changed today. It's now 630. Sufficiently fast to travel the height of the building in less than 1 minute, and should have power operated doors 2 foot 9 inches wide minimum, or 800 in new money, 800 millimeters. Additional requirements were gradually added. Fire resistant landing doors with normally 1 hour rating against ingress of fire. And also local authorities imposed further specific requirements i.e. the Section 20 of the London Building Act in 1939. Next slide, please. So common standards for lifts were formed into BS 2655 Part 1 1970, which specified requirements for firemen's lifts. 2655 was the general standard for lifts, and in 1979 this was superseded by BS 5655. This required a larger car size, as I said, 630 kg, and improved protection by the building of firemen's lifts, which I'll cover in a minute. Published in 1986, BS 5588 Part 5 included the first requirements for a firefighting lift. So not a fireman's lift, a firefighting lift. And I will go through the differences shortly. And revisions were updated in 1991 and 2004. In 2008, there was a shift. The contents of 5588 Part 5 were incorporated into BS 9999, which is about fire safety in buildings. And 9999 didn't contain the requirements for a firefighting lift. It just generalised about the requirement for one. But it does still talk about the fabric of the building, compartmentation and that sort of thing. Next slide, please. So when EN 81 Part 72 came out in 2003, this was the first European standard for firefighters, BS EN 81. BS means it's been adopted by British standards, EN means it's a European norm, so it applies all around Europe, whereas BS 9999 and 9991, which we're just about to cover, they've only got a BS in front of them, so they're parochial to Great Britain only. So since EN 8172 came out, 9991, BS 9991 has also been published, and that covers residential buildings. Incidentally, there is a 9992 which covers railway buildings, but that's outside the scope of today. EN 81 Part 72 was further updated in 2015 and 2020. You can see the standard there on the right. So you can see there have been some shifts. Next slide, please. So the Fire Safety England Regulations 2022, for lifts which fall under these regulations, the responsible person must undertake routine checks of any lift that is for use by firefighters and evacuation lifts. These are checks that the lift is in efficient working order and in good repair. And Andrew will cover these in detail later on. They include weekly, monthly, and an annual performance inspection. Next slide, please. So when modernising, again, you can see there I'm saying this is a British standard and not an EN, but a standard did come out in 2016, known as 8899, which is entitled Improvement of Firefighting and Evacuation Provisions in Existing Lifts. Next slide, please. So let's have a look at the difference between a fireman's lift and a firefighting lift. So a fireman's lift is now basically an obsolete term, but the facility is often retained in older lifts that are being modernised or upgraded and have the facility. The system is extremely simple in that there's a switch at the main floor, which when operated, causes the lift to stop at the next floor if it's in travel, not open its doors, illuminate an indicator in the lift car stating it's on fire recall service. The lift returns to the floor where the switch is located and parks with its doors open. The lift will then only respond to a call placed on the system within the lift car and will go to that floor and park with its doors open. The system can be specified for new lifts or those being modernised, but must not be confused with a firefighting lift. Next slide, please. So a firefighting lift, a completely different animal. A firefighting lift must have the following safety features as a minimum. Minimum 630 kg, that's an 8-person lift car. Minimum car interior size of 1400 by 1100. It must travel the height of the building in less than 60 seconds. That includes acceleration and deceleration. It must have automatic power operated doors, at least 800 millimeters wide and 2000 millimeters tall. Position indicators fitted inside the lift car and at the fire service access level. There should be a two-way intercom provided between the machine room, lift car and fire service access level. An emergency trapdoor should be provided in the car roof with a minimum size of 400 millimeters by 500 millimeters. The lift should not be used for goods transportation in general terms. Next slide, please. So rescue shall be available from both inside and outside the lift car. So there could be a ladder inside the lift car is stored, for instance, or on top of the lift car. Buttons shall be protected against water ingress. A firefighter's hose emits 25 litres a second of water. It's quite forceful. Electrical equipment in the shaft shall be protected against water ingress. An audible fire alarm must be fitted to alert a maintenance operative of the firefighter in need. If they're maintaining the lift at the time, they should have heard the fire alarm within the building, but they should get an indication that the lift is required. A secondary power supply must be provided. The shaft must be protected from water ingress by drains and or ramps. A peekaboo control system when on firefighting mode shall be included. A peekaboo control system is very different to the old system on the fireman's lift, where the lift just went where it was and parked with its doors open. On a peekaboo system, when the lift arrives, the firefighter must put their finger on the button and hold it until the doors are open. If in the event of a flashback out on the landing and the firefighter is thrown off the controls, the doors will close and protect them. The car interior component shall be a minimum of Class 0 resisting combustion, must have fire rated doors, and it must be within a separate fire compartment. You can see the drawing on the left there. The fire lift is shown there in its own compartment, separate from the other passenger lifts. Shaft smoke ventilation should be provided as well. Next slide, please. So we're also talking about evacuation today as well. And it's really important to understand that there is no standard yet for evacuation lifts. You can see on the right there that the note from MHE4, which is the committee that is responsible for evacuation lifts or lifts in general. It made it to a PR, but it timed out. And so it's going to have to be reworked. And that's currently well advanced, and it's being revisited at the moment. There is a problem there which you need to be aware of, that the London Building Plan specifically mentions the requirement to comply with EN 8176, but it's never been published, so you can't comply with Part 76. The other thing I think is important to get across is it's not for a lift engineer to advise you on the requirements for evacuation or an evacuation lift. That's for building professionals. A lift engineer will make the lift do what that professional asks it to do. But each building is individual, needs to be risk assessed and must have its own plan. It's a specialist job to be undertaken by evacuation professionals in conjunction with the lift engineers. Next slide, please. Hospitals often fall under a high risk environment, and they all have their own escape plans. Attention is drawn to the HTM-05 fire safety. On the left there, you can see HTM-0802, the 2016 edition, which has all sorts of requirements for lifts specific to hospital environments. In particular, the authorising engineer for lifts for the hospital must be a chartered engineer. There are a number of other roles within that, including a lift steward, a lift person for lift release, and also the appointed person as well. So an escape lift by definition is a passenger lift protected in accordance with HTM 0503 to enable it to be used safely transport staff, patients and visitors to the ground floor in the event of a fire. Clearly in a hospital environment, there's risks there. There's risks that a passenger may be bedridden, may be attached to life-saving equipment, and all of these things need to be taken into consideration. In fact, there are two sizes of bed lift under the HTM, a 26-person and a 33-person, which are very, very different to the 8-person lifts we've been talking about before. Also, HTM defines a firefighter's lift as a lift with protection measures, controls and signals that enable it to be used under the direct control of the fire and rescue service in fighting a fire. Next slide, please. So, training in the use of equipment will be by the authorised person lifts. That is a specific role under HTM and by the site fire safety advisor in relation to the emergency evacuation duties. Training, where applicable, should take into account the description of the operation of the lift and its features as described in the lift owner's manual, which is provided for each new lift under the lift regulations. Also, in the HTM Memorandum 0503, there is a full set of details for escape lifts as well. Next slide, please. So there is also another act that you need to be aware of. It applies to workplaces, but this is known as LOLA, or the Lifting Operations and the Lifting Equipment Regulations. This applies specifically to workplaces, but there are environments where its principles are applied under the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations. For instance, a residential building isn't a workplace. However, when using the lift, someone like the postman or an Amazon delivery driver, other delivery companies are available, will be using that lift, and its purpose will be as a piece of work equipment. There is case law on this. A lady in an architect's office was struck by a set of lift doors and hurt her arm. And it was in that case, it was defined that a lift is a piece of work equipment under the Provision and Use of Work Equipment Regulations. PURE brings you back to LOLA, and within there, subject to paragraph 6, every employer shall ensure that lifting equipment which is exposed to conditions causing deterioration, which is liable to result in dangerous situations, is thoroughly examined. So, by thoroughly examined, this is the equivalent of an MOT on your car, except it's for your lift. Escalators, if anyone's got any escalators, are not covered by the LOLA regulations. In the case of lifting equipment for lifting persons or an accessory for lifting, at least every 6 months. So a LOLA examination and a certificate will be issued every 6 months on a passenger carrying lift. In the case of other lifting equipment, it will be at least every 12 months. So something like a tower crane will be every 12 months. In either case, it's in accordance with an examination scheme. So all of the inspection bodies have an examination scheme, which you can see. Most of them are members of the two trade associations, are SAFED, the Safety Assessment Federation, and INITA, which is the independent inspectors body. Each time that exceptional circumstances which are liable to jeopardise the safety of the lifted equipment have occurred, and if appropriate for the purpose, is inspected by a competent person at suitable intervals between thorough examinations. So some people actually increase the number of inspections they have. Certainly in power stations, the periodicity is 3 months, not 6 months. Also, the examiner, the competent person, if they find defects, if they're what we know as category A defects, so a defect that is a threat to the safety of persons using the lift, they will, when they complete their form for you, their certificate, they are obligated to send that to the enforcement authority, be that the local authority environmental health officer, or in some circumstances, the health and safety executive. There will very often be other defects on there, and you will see things, as you do with your car and an MOT, saying, you know, the ropes are worn but serviceable. That's the the equivalent of the same wording with your car tyres. Still legal, still fine, still safe. Next slide, please. So hopefully from what you've got from me, you can identify what type of lift you have, and you also have an idea of some of the standards and legislation that apply. But if you do have any queries, do please contact us and we will assist where we can. So I'll now hand over to Andrew.
Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to my section of the webinar. This part specifically covers the checks and inspections required for lifts that are used by firefighters and for evacuation. So why are we here? I'm sure some of you are asking. Right, we're here to discuss the Fire Safety England Regulations 2022. This regulation makes it a legal requirement from the 23rd of January this year for responsible persons in high-rise residential buildings to undertake additional monthly checks on any lifts within their building that are designed, installed and maintained to be used by firefighters and with the addition of evacuation lifts. The link at the bottom of this screen, which you will be provided at the end of the presentation, takes you to a government site specifically related to the Fire Safety England regulation. All the information that I've used within my presentation comes from this site, so it can be checked and reread at your convenience. So the Fire Service England regulation, point 7 is the part that specifically deals with lifts. This is split into several paragraphs. Paragraph 1, shown above, states the responsible person in relation to a high-rise residential building must undertake monthly routine checks for lifts for use by firefighters and evacuation. There are also monthly checks required for essential firefighting equipment within the building. Later in my presentation, we'll cover the routine checks in a lot more detail. So point 2, paragraph 2. Where the responsible person identifies that any fault with a lift for use by firefighters or evacuation or any other piece of essential firefighting equipment, they must take steps to rectify the fault. This means that as soon as the fault becomes evident to the responsible person, then they must put the wheels in motion to rectify the fault, can't just leave it. This may involve somebody on site doing the initial check, make sure that there's nothing blocking the lift, but also will probably mean reporting the fault to the maintenance company. Paragraph 3. Where a fault is identified under paragraph 2, which cannot be rectified within a 24-hour period, beginning with the time the fault is identified, the responsible person must, as soon as reasonably practical, carry out 2 things. A, you must report the fault to the local fire service and rescue authority by electronic means. Come on to that in a minute. And when the fault's been recovered, the lift's back in service, they must report the rectification of the fault to the local fire service, again, by the same electronic means. Responsible persons will not have to inform their local fire service immediately regarding a relevant fault if they believe it can be resolved within the 24-hour period. If the issue then cannot be resolved within 24 hours, they must report it to the fire and rescue service as soon as practical. The responsible person is required to arrange for the issue to be fixed and report back when it is resolved. The link at the bottom of this screen provides reporting information. Responsible persons should also consider the impact of the fault and inform fire and rescue service of the impact of a lift failure, for example. Responsible persons should also consider whether the fault would require an update to be made to the building building's fire risk assessment and then act accordingly. The fire lift being out of service may present a problem to get people out of the building, get firemen in, so the building use may have to change during this period. So paragraph 4. The responsible person must make a record of the monthly checks previously mentioned, and these records must be available to all people in the building. So during the last few slides, we've mentioned a few words, responsible person being one of them. So I thought I'd cover a few definitions. So the definition of the responsible person is a person or persons responsible for or having effective control over the fire safety provisions adopted in or appropriate to the premises or building or risk where the lift is installed. This is again covered in the link below. For practical purposes, if we take a block of flats as an example, the responsible person will be the person who has control of the premises in connection with carrying on a business. This will typically be the freeholder of them or the managing agents for the block, or for example, a residents management committee. So whoever's taking control of the building has these responsibilities under this regulation. So next definition. What is a high-rise residential building? So a high-rise residential building is if either of the following circumstances apply. If the building's at least 18 metres above ground level, measured from the lowest ground level adjoining the outside of the building to the height of the floor in the top story, you can ignore any plant rooms, machinery rooms on the top floor, they're not residential. Or if the building is 7 stories or more, excluding any stories that are below ground level. So next definition, routine checks. Routine checks means a check that any lift or piece of equipment is in efficient working order and in good repair, carried out in accordance with the relevant industry standards, if they're available, or any recommendations by the manufacturers of the equipment within an operator's manual. I'll give more information on the required routine checks in the next few slides. Yeah. So, routine checks. You as a responsible person must undertake monthly routine checks of all lifts that are intended for use by firefighters. Similarly, you must undertake monthly routine checks of any evacuation lifts that are provided for the evacuation of disabled people in the event of fire. It's not envisaged that any of the above checks that you have to carry out will need to be carried out by specialists or contractors. Yeah. And these checks are in addition to the service and maintenance of the system. They are not included in regular maintenance. The monthly checks will involve the operation of the firefighter switch or evacuation switch to ensure that it causes the lift to return to the fire and rescue service access level, after which it can then be operated only by the controls within the car. It should then be ensured that these controls enable the lift to be taken to an upper floor on which the doors can be opened and closed from within the lift car. Peekaboo system, as Dave described earlier. You should also ensure by means of a random check that the landing controls are disabled and cannot call the lift to the floor in question. All of the comments I've made are taken from the UK government guidance document. Check your fire safety responsibilities under the Fire Safety England regulation. This document is available online following the links given. Again, it's not envisaged by the regulation that any of the above checks will need to be carried out by specialists or contractors. And again, they are in addition to the maintenance. So following on from Dave's presentation, how do you know what routine checks are required? This is where it can get a little bit more complicated. The first thing we need to do is identify the type of lift you have installed in your building. As you now appreciate from Dave's presentation, this is definitely not straightforward. Examples of the equipment you may see installed at the fire service access level are shown on the screen. These are only a few examples. There are many different types. It may not be immediately obviously what features are present on the lift for use by the firefighters. So, where a lift for fire service use needs to be classified and checked, a full check of the lift features using BS 8899, the standard mentioned earlier by Dave. Annex A provides a checklist for this, and this should be undertaken by a competent person. This is something Classic and others can help you with. Annex A also lists environmental building requirements, which must be checked by the building's responsible person. So the checks have to be carried out in conjunction with the expert, not solely by the lift expert. So we've identified what lift we have. We know what checks or what the outcome of the check should be. Now we need to carry out the checks and record what we do. So until the reporting templates for these checks are formally included in BS 8899, which they're not at the moment, the following may be used as a basis. The next few slides show examples of routine checks recording templates. These templates have been produced by LEA. LEA is the Lift and Escalator Industry Association. The link below takes you to their website, and there's excellent information for lift owners and responsible persons. So we'll quickly show you some of the templates that come up. You won't be able to read all the writing on them because of the size, but these will be provided at the end of the presentation for your use, or can be downloaded from the link previously. So this one's for lifts with fire recall. As you can see, it's a one-page document. There are 7 checks to be made monthly. It's not extensive. And as previously mentioned, it's not envisaged that we would need an expert or the lift company or contractors to carry these out. Yeah. There are notes with each of these templates to help the person carrying out the check complete the form correctly. I haven't shown these here, but these can be provided if required. So lifts for use by firefighters. Yeah. Again, not an extensive list. Again, only 6 items on this. Remember, these are the monthly checks. We will come to annual checks shortly. There's a specific checklist for evacuation lifts shown here. 6 items again. These must be filled in and kept every month in a place available to others. The next check may be slightly more complicated. Failure of the primary power supply. There are a few items here which require the mains power supply to be disconnected and the secondary power supply to kick in to run the lift. BS 8899 states that monthly, a failure of the primary electricity supply is to be simulated. If a generator provides a standby power supply, it needs to energize the lifts for at least 1 hour. Type of secondary power supply installed on your lifts will need to be verified and the method of checking confirmed by the manufacturer or installer of this secondary power supply. The monthly check may need more involvement from others, but will need to be assessed on a site-by-site basis. Again, this is something we can help with to identify the equipment you have. BS 8899/2016 contains recommendations for weekly, monthly, and annual tests for firefighters' lifts and lifts for evacuations. These annual checks should be requested by the owner / responsible person and would typically be carried out by a competent person or other person with specialist lift and fire evacuation knowledge. As you can see from this list, it is far more extensive than the others. And this isn't something that would be expected to be carried out by the responsible person. As previously mentioned, it would be a specialist There's also annual inspections for evacuation lifts. Again, more extensive than the monthly checks, not as much as a firefighter's lift, as an evacuation lift doesn't have as many features to check. But again, this would need a specialist to carry out these tests. So just a quick overview. From the 23rd of January 2023, in respect of lifts which are used by firefighters or evacuation, the responsible person, as defined earlier, needs to undertake monthly routine checks of the lift for use by firefighters and evacuation lifts, take steps to rectify any faults which are identified, notify the local fire and rescue service when a lift for use by firefighters or for evacuations is out of service for more than 24 hours. And we need to make a record of the monthly checks undertaken and make that record accessible to residents of the building. I hope this webinar has been informative and enjoyable. It can be quite heavy, but it's not that complicated. We're here to help. If you have any questions, then please feel free to ask via the chat function, as mentioned earlier. If you have any questions in the future that come up, then please contact myself. My contact details are on screen. You can also contact me through our website. We'll email a full presentation after this webinar. So, yeah, and it will also be on the website as well within the next few days, including a recording of this session. So thank you for your time. If we have any questions, I think Lindsay will host the questions.
Sorry, Andrew, I was held on mute. So again, thank you very much, both of you, for the presentations. And now we'll take any questions that have been submitted or any questions you may have. Remember, please, to post these via the Zoom chat. I'll read out the questions and assign either Andrew or Dave to comment. We did have a comment earlier, which I hope has been addressed, but we had a question about what is a high-rise building? Andrew, I know you covered it on the slide. Would you just like to restate what a high-rise building is, please?
Yeah, a high-rise building is a high-rise residential building at the moment. A high-rise residential building is one that has 18 metres above ground floor level and also or 7 stories above ground. The stories don't include a plant room at the top of the building, but anything that's 6 or 7 floors would be classed as a high-rise building.
Another question. If you have more than one firefighting lift, would you still need to inform the fire service if one of them was out of action for more than 24 hours? Andrew, do you want to comment on this one? Yeah,
yes, you would. The building design is probably designed around the fact that it has 2 firefighters lifts and needs 2 firefighters lifts. So the local fire authorities still need to know that one of those lifts is out of action, and the building needs to be assessed whether it can still function correctly with only one of these lifts in service.
Next question. I'm a manager for a residential development which has 6 floors and approximately 20 metres tall. We've got 2 to 3 apartments on floors ground to 5 and a penthouse on floor 6. I understood that I don't need to have a fire lift. Is this correct?
The requirement for a fire lift is not something that the lift company would advise you directly on. That needs to be taken into with your building designer, the local fire authority, the strategy for the building in the event of fire. We can provide information and solve the requirements afterwards, but the request, whether you need it or not, is not really down to the lift company, or not at all down to the lift company.
Thank you. I think that's all our questions at the moment. I'll just check again to see if there's anything else come up on the chat. Not at this time. I guess we'll just give it another minute, and if there aren't any further questions, then I will perhaps yeah, there's no further questions for either of you guys at the minute.
As the slide that's still visible, my contact details are there and our website details are there. If anybody has any questions post this webinar on specifically on fire or generally on their lifts, this is something that I encourage people to send in. I enjoy trying to help provide the answers. So please get in touch on either of those methods of communicating with myself. I'd be happy to help.
Okay, I think we've just got another question that's come in, which is, are we going to send out the slides? So let me just address that for you. Firstly, I'd like to thank each of you that has joined the call today for your interest and the questions on this important topic. My thanks also to Dave and to Andrew for their presentations and for sharing their knowledge on the subject. We will be putting this whole recording onto the website with the slide deck, and we will have the slides available for you. And as Andrew said, the links are there to take you to the other sites, which will give you further information if required. But again, if there's any questions you may have, please put them into the website information box, and we will get you an answer either via Andrew or by one of the other members of the team. So I think with that, we will have all of that on the website on Thursday morning. So again, my thanks to all of you for joining. And this concludes our session for today. As mentioned, we will be looking to do further ones of topics like this with other technical seminars, and we'll keep you informed on the subjects as they come available. And again, we would welcome any feedback that you have about the session today and what you'd like us to cover in the future, and that will help us again give you information as we move forward. So with that, I'll close the call, and again, thank you all for your time this morning.